Disclaimer, this is part 2 of a reading of Edgar Allan Poe's The Gold Bug, published 1843. Some listeners might find the language in this story upsetting. We have a full disclaimer on the language of the story at the start of part 1 and a discussion section about it at the end of the story as indicated by timecodes. We do not wish to offend or insult anyone. We hope you enjoy this comedic reading of the story. Well, I'm back.
So, who was that knocking at your door?
I don't know. I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more.
Huh?
Okay, let's continue the story. Taking now a spade himself and giving one to Jupiter and one to me, Legrand begged us to set about one to digging as quickly as possible. To speak the truth, I had no especial relish for such amusement at any time, and at that particular moment would most willingly have declined it, for the night was coming on, and I felt much fatigued with the exercise already taken. But I saw no mode of escape, and was fearful of disturbing my poor friend's unequanimity by a refusal. Could I have depended, indeed, upon Jupiter's aid, I would have had no hesitation in attempting to get the lunatic home by force, but but I was too well assured that the old Negro's disposition to hope that he would assist me under any circumstances in a personal contest with his master. I made no doubt that the latter had been infected with some of the innumerable southern superstitions about money buried, and that his fantasy... Whoa, interesting. Fantasy with a PH. Okay.
Must have been a Sega fan.
Had received confirmation by the finding of the Scarabaeus, or perhaps by Jupiter's obstinacy. Whoa, that looks like it has an N missing. Obstinacy. Well, okay, maybe obstinacy. In maintaining it to be a bug of real gold. A mind disposed to lunacy would readily be led away by such suggestions, especially if chiming in with favorite preconceived ideas. And then I called to mind the poor fellow's speech about the beetles being the index of his fortune. Upon the whole, I was sadly vexed and puzzled, but at length I concluded to make a virtue of necessity, to dig with a good will, and thus the sooner to convince the visionary, by ocular demonstration, of the fallacy of the opinions he attained.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very convoluted way of saying crazy will only believe, once he finds that there's no gold there. Yeah. The lanterns having been lit, we all fell to work with a zeal worthy of a more rational cause, and as the glare fell upon our persons and implements, I could not help thinking how picturesque a group we composed. And how strange and suspicious our labors must have appeared to any interloper who by chance might have stumbled upon our whereabouts. We dogged very steadily for 2 hours. Little was said, and our chief embarrassment lay in the yelpings of the dog, who took exceeding interest in our proceedings. Here at length became so obstreperous. What? Okay, I gotta... Marked by unruly, aggressive noisiness, stubbornly resistant.
Obstreperous.
Yeah.
It sounded like a bloody wizard when I said obstreperous.
Yeah, it does sound like something from Harry Potter. Yeah. Well, that we grew fearful of his giving the alarm to some stragglers in the vicinity, or rather, this was the apprehension of Legrand. For myself, I should have rejoiced at any interruption which might have enabled me to get the wanderer home. The noise was at length very effectually silenced by Jupiter, who, getting out of the hole with the dogged air of deliberation, tied the brute's mouth up with one of his suspenders, and then returned with a grave chuckle to his task. You call that a chuckle? That was more like a giggle. Okay. When the time mentioned had expired, and we reached a depth of 5 feet, and yet no signs of any treasure became manifest, a general pause ensued, and I began to hope that the farce was at an end. Legrand, however, although evidently much disconcerted, wiped his brow thoughtfully and recommended. Sorry. I read that incorrectly, yeah. We had excavated the entire circle of the 4 feet diameter, and now we slightly enlarged the limit. Okay, yeah, sorry. And went to the farther depth of 2 feet. Still nothing apprehended. The gold seeker, whom I sincerely pitied, at length clambered from the pit, with the bitterest disappointment imprinted upon every feature, and proceeded slowly and reluctantly to put on his coat, which we had thrown off at the beginning of his labor. In the meantime, I made no remark. Jupiter, at signal from his master, began to gather up his tools. This done, and the dog having been unmuzzled, we turned in profound silence towards home. We had taken perhaps a dozen steps in this direction when, with a loud oath, Legrand strode up to Jupiter and seized him by the collar. The astonished Negro opened his eyes and mouth to the fullest extent, let fall the spades, and fell upon his knees. "You scoundrel!" said Legrand, hissing out his syllables from between his clenched teeth. "You infernal black villain! Speak, I tell you! Answer me this instant without prevarication! Which is your left eye?" "Oh my golly, Massa Will! Ain't this here my left eye for certain?" roared the terrified Jupiter, placing his hand upon his right organ of vision and holding it there with a desperate pertinacity, and if in immediate dread of his master's attempt to gouge. "I thought so, I knew it, hurrah!" vociferated, Legrand, letting the Negro go and executing a series of curvets and caracols. Much of the astonishment of his valet, who, arising from his knees, looked mutely from his master to myself, and then from myself to his master. "Come, we must go back," said the latter. The game's not up yet," and he again led the way to the tulip tree. "Jupiter," he said, "when we reach its foot, come here. Was the skull nailed to the limb of the face, with the face outward, or with the face to the limb?" "We face was out, massa, so that the crows could get at the ice good, without any trouble." Well then, was it this eye or that through which you let the beetle fall?" Here Legrand touched each of Jupiter's eyes. "'Twas this eye, massa, the left eye, just as you tell me." And here it was his right eye that the Negro indicated. "That will do. We must try again." Here, my friend, about whose madness I now saw, or fancied that I saw, certain indications of method, removed the peg which marked the spot where the beetle fell, and to a spot about 3 inches to the westward of its former position, taking now the tape measure from the nearest point of the trunk to the peg, as before, and continuing the extensions in a straight line to the distance of 50 feet, a spot was indicated, removed by several yards from the point at which we had been digging.
I like how Legrand sounded incredibly relieved instead of mad after hearing that answer.
Yeah, okay. We will talk about this scene at the end of the podcast as well. But let's keep moving. Around the new position, a circle somewhat larger than in the former instance was now described, and we again set to work with the spades. I was dreadfully wary, but scarcely understanding what had occasioned the change in my thoughts. I felt no longer any great aversion from the labor imposed. I had become most unaccountably interested, nay, even excited. Perhaps there was something amid all the extravagant demeanor of Legrand, some air of forethought or of deliberation which impressed me. I dug eagerly, and then caught myself actually looking with something that very much resembled expectation for the fancied treasure, the vision of which had demented my unfortunate companion at a period where such vagaries of thought most fully possessed me, and when we had been at work perhaps an hour and a half, we were again interrupted by the violent howling of the dog. His uneasiness in this first instance had been evidently but the result of playfulness and caprice, but he now assumed bitter and serious tone. Upon Jupiter's again attempting to muzzle him, he made furious resistance, and leaping into the hole, tore up the mold frantically with his claws. In a few seconds, he had uncovered a mass of human bones, forming 2 complete skeletons.
Hello.
Which talked for some reason. Intermingled with several buttons of metal and what appeared to be the dust of decayed woolen. 1 or 2 strokes of a spade upturned the blade of a large Spanish knife, and as we dug further, 3 or 4 loose pieces of gold and silver coin came to light. At sight of these, at the sight of these, the joy of Jupiter could scarcely be restrained, but the countenance of his master wore an air of extreme disappointment. He urged us, however, to continue our exertions, and the words were hardly uttered when I stumbled and fell forward, having caught the toe of my boot in a large ring of iron that lay half buried in the loose earth. No sound effect for getting caught?
No, not this time.
Okay, we now worked in earnest, and never did I...
Hey, Vern!
And never did I pass 10 minutes of more intense excitement.
Ah!
During this interval, we had fairly unearthed an oblong chest of wood. Oh no! Last time it wasn't good. There was nothing good in an oblong box. Okay, which, from its perfect preservation and the wonderful hardness, had plainly been subjected to some mineralization process, perhaps that of the bichlorine of mercury. Ooh.
Yeah, number one bites the dust. Number one bites the dust.
Okay, not the mercury I was expecting. Okay, this box was 3 feet and a half long, 3 feet, 3 feet broad, and 2.5 feet deep. It was firmly secured by bands of wrought iron, riveted and forming a kind of trellis work over the whole. On each side of the chest, near the top, and where the 3 rings of iron, 6 in all, by means of which a firm hold could be obtained by 6 persons. Our utmost united endeavors served only to disturb the coffer very slightly in its bed. We at once saw the impossibility of removing so great a weight. Luckily, the sole fastening of the lid consisted of 2 sliding bolts. We threw back, trembling and panting with anxiety. And our little dog, too. In an instant, a treasure of incalculable... Okay, not as small. It was Newfoundland. In an instant, a treasure of incalculable value lay gleaming before us. As the rays of the lantern fell within the pit, there flashed upward from the confused heap of gold and of jewels a glow and a glare that absolutely dazzled our eyes. I shall not pretend to describe the feelings with which I gazed. Amazement was, of course, predominant. Legrand appeared exhausted with excitement and spoke very few words. Jupiter's countenance wore, for some minutes, as deadly a pallor as it is possible, in the nature of things, for any Negro's visage to assume. He seemed stupefied. Stupefied?
No. No.
Thunder-stricken. Oh, I was hoping for AC/DC. Okay.
No, that would have been too obvious.
Okay. Presently, he fell upon his knees in the pit, and burying his and burying his naked arms to the elbow in gold, let them there remain, and as if enjoying the luxury of a bath. At length, with a deep sigh, he
Just
exclaimed,
getting Scrooge McDuck vibes now.
yeah, exactly. At length, with a deep sigh, he exclaimed, as if in soliloquy, "And this all come of the gold bug, the putty gold bug, the poorly little gold bug. What I boost in that savage kind of style. Ain't you shaved of yourself, neighbor? Answer me that." It became necessary at last that I should arouse both master and valet to the expediency of removing the treasure. If it was growing late, and it behooved us to make exertion that we might get everything housed before daylight. It was difficult to say what should be done, and much time was spent in deliberation. So focused were the ideas of all, we finally lightened the box by removing 2/3 of its contents. When we were...
That kind of lightened.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
When we were enabled with some trouble to raise it from the hole, the articles taken out were deposited among the brambles, and the dog left to guard them, with strict orders from Jupiter neither upon any pretense to stir from the spot, nor to open his mouth until our return. We then hurriedly made for home with the chest. Sorry, reaching the hut in safety. But after excessive toil at 1 o'clock in the morning, worn out as we were, it was not in human nature to do more just then. We rested until 2, had supper, starting for the hills immediately afterwards, armed with 3 stout sacks, which, by good luck, we were upon the premises. A little before 4, we arrived at the pit, divided the remainder of the booty as equally as might be among us, and leaving the holes unfilled, again set out for the hut, at which, for a second time, we deposited our golden burthens? Whoa. Burden. If it was burden, that would make sense. Okay. Just as the first streaks of the dawn gleamed from over the treetops in the east. We were now thoroughly broken down, but the intense excitement of the time denied us repose. After an unquiet slumber of some 3 or 4 hours' duration, we arose as if by pre-concert. Okay, I like that. To make examination of our treasure. The chest had been...
Ooh, look at the treasure.
The chest had been full to the brim, and we spent the whole day and the greater part of the next night in a scrutiny of its contents. There had been nothing like order or arrangement. Everything had been heaped in promiscuously. Okay, heaped in promiscuously. That's why I read it badly. Okay. Having assorted all the care, we found ourselves possessed of even vaster wealth than we had at first supposed. In coin, there was rather more than $450,000, estimating the value of the pieces as accurately as we could by the tables of the period.
That was a lot of money for back then.
Definitely, yeah. It's a small fortune, basically. There was not a particle of silver. All was gold, of antique date and a great variety. French, Spanish, and German money, with a few English guineas, and some counters, of which we had never seen specimens before. There were several very large and heavy coins, so worn that we could make nothing of their inscriptions. There was no American money. The value of the jewels we found more difficulty in estimating. There were diamonds, some of them exceedingly large and fine, 110 in all, and not one of them small. 18 rubies of remarkable brilliancy, 310 emeralds, all very
Oh
beautiful.
no, it's bad enough there's only one of me.
And 21 sapphires with an opal. These stones had all been broken from their settings and thrown loose in the chest. The settings themselves, which we picked out from among the other gold, appear to have been beaten up with hammers, as if to prevent identification. Besides all this, there was a vast quantity of solid gold ornaments, nearly 200 massive fingers and ear rings. Finger and ear rings, sorry. Like gold fingers? Oh, okay.
Yes, blonde.
Rich chains, 30 of these, if I remember, 83 very large and heavy crucifixes, 5 gold censers of great value, a prodigious golden punch bowl, ornaments with richly chased vine leaves, and bacchanalian figures with two sword handles exquisitely embossed, and many other smaller articles which I cannot recollect. The weight of these valuables exceeding 350 pounds, avoirdupois. I don't know what that means. System of weights based on. Okay, so it's a weight thing. Doesn't say anything to me. And in this estimate, I have not included 197 superb gold watches.
Gold watches.
Three of the number were being worth each $500 if one. Many of these were very old and as timekeepers valueless. The works having suffered more or less from corrosion, but all were richly jeweled, and in cases of great worth. We estimated the entire content of the chest that night at $1.5 million. And
Damn.
yes, and upon subsequent disposal of the trinkets and jewels, a few being retained for our own use, it was found that we had greatly undervalued the treasure. When at length we had concluded our examination, and the intense excitement of the time had, in some measure, subsided, Legrand, who saw that I was dying with impatience for a solution of this most extraordinary riddle, entered into a full detail of all the circumstances connected with it. "You remember," said he, "the night when I handed you the rough sketch I had made of the Scarabaeus. You recollect also that I became quite vexed at you for insisting that my drawing resembles a death's head. When you first made this assertion, I thought you were jesting, but afterwards I called it to mind the peculiar spots on the back of the insect, and admitted to myself that your remark had some little foundation in fact. Still, the sneer at my graphic powers irritated me, for I am considered a good artist, and therefore, when you handed me the scrap of parchment, I was about to crumple it up and throw it angrily into the fire. The scrap of paper. Yeah. The scrap of paper, you mean? Said I. No, it had much of the appearance of paper, and at first I supposed it to be such, but when I came to draw upon it, I discovered it at once to be a piece of very thin parchment. It was quite dirty, you remember. Well, as I was in the very act of crumpling it up, my glance fell upon the sketch at which you had been looking, and you may imagine my astonishment when I perceived in fact, the figure of the death's head, just where it seemed to me. I had made the drawing of the beetle. For a moment, I was too much amazed to think with accuracy. I knew that my design was very different in detail from this, although there was a certain similarity in general outline. Presently, I took a candle and seating myself at the other end of the room, proceeded to scrutinize the parchment more closely. Upon turning it over, I saw my own sketch upon the reverse, just as I had made it. My first idea now was mere surprise at the really remarkable similarity of outline, at the singular coincidence involved in the fact that, unknown to me, there should have been a skull upon the other side of the parchment, immediately beneath my figure of the Scarabaeus, and that this skull, not only in outline but in size, should so closely resemble my drawing. I say the singularity of this coincidence absolutely stupefied me for a time. This is the usual effect of such coincidences. The mind struggles to establish a connection, a sequence of cause and effect, and being unable to do so suffers a species of temporary paralysis. But when I recovered from this stupor, there dawned upon me gradually a conviction which startled me even far more than the coincidence. I began distinctly, positively, to remember that there had been no drawing on the parchment when I made my sketch of the Scarabaeus. I became perfectly certain of this, for I recollected turning up first one side and then the other, in search of the cleanest spot. Had the skull been there, of course, I could not have failed to notice it. Here was indeed a mystery which I felt it impossible to explain, but even at the very early moment where it seemed to glimmer faintly within the most remote and secret chambers of my intellect, a glowworm-like conception. That's a really funny way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Of that truth which last night's adventure brought to so magnificent a demonstration, I arose at once, and putting the parchment securely away, dismissed all rather reflection until I should be alone. Okay,
Yeah,
I think, and I guess I'll be dropping the Legrand voice now because my throat is really hurting. Yeah, when you had gone and when Jupiter was fast asleep, I betook myself to a more methodical investigation of the affair. And the first place, I considered the manner in which the parchment had come into my possession. The spot where we discovered the Scarabaeus was on the coast of the mainland. About a mile eastward of the island, and but a short distance above the high water mark. Upon my taking hold of it, it gave me a sharp bite, which caused me to let it drop. Sorry.
Yeah, you little bastard! What did you do that for? Oh.
Jupiter, with his accustomed caution, before seizing the insect, which had flown towards him, looked about him for a leaf or something of that nature by which to take hold of it. It was at this moment that his eyes, and mine also, fell upon the scrap of parchment, which I then supposed to be paper. It was lying half buried in the sand, a corner sticking up, near the spot.
Oing, 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 oing.
Well, that's a weird sound for parchment to make, okay? Near
The wind was particularly loud that day.
Ah, yes, the sound of wind. Boing. Near the spot where the answer, my friend, is boing in the wind. The answer is boing in the wind. Okay.
What's next? Gone with the boing?
Okay. Near the spot where we found it, I observed the remnants of the hull of what appeared to have been a ship's longboat. The wreck seemed to have been there for a very great while, and the resemblance to boat timbers could scarcely be traced. Well, Jupiter picked up the parchment, wrapped the beetle in it, and gave it to me. Soon afterwards we turned to go home, and on the way met Lieutenant Gary. I showed him the insect, and he begged me to let him take a look at take it to the fort. Why am I? Sorry, I guess I'm tired. Mm-hmm. On my consenting, he thrust it forthwith into his waistcoat pocket, without the parchment in which it had been wrapped, and which I had continued to hold in my hand during the inspection. Perhaps he dreaded my changing my mind, and thought it best to make sure of the prize at once. You know how enthusiastic he is on all subjects connected to connected with natural history. At the same time, without being conscious of it. Oh my God! I must have deposited the parchment in my own pocket. You remember that when I went to the table for the purpose of making a sketch of the beetle, I found no paper where it was usually kept. I looked in the drawer. I found none there. I searched my pocket, hoping to find an old letter. And then my hand fell upon the parchment. I thus detail the precise mode in which it came to my possession, for the circumstances impressed me with peculiar force. No doubt you will think me fanciful, but I had already established a kind of connection. And connection with an X once again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see that too.
Yeah. I had
Connection.
I have put together two links of a great chain. There was a boat lying on a sea coast, and not far from the boat was a parchment, not a paper, with a skull depicted on it. You will, of course, ask, where is the connection? I reply that the skull, or death's head, is the well-known emblem of the pirate.
Yarr!
Yarr! Flag of the death's head is hoisted in all engagements. I don't think that's the way the pirates used the flag, but okay. I have said that the scrap was parchment and not paper. Parchment is durable.
Sorry, I just thought for the summon. Yarg, let's get married. Raise the flag.
Yeah. Almost imperishable. Matters of little moment are rarely consigned to parchment, since, for the mere ordinary purposes of drawing or writing, it is not nearly so well adapted as paper. This reflection suddenly suggested some meaning, some relevancy in the death's head. I did not fail to observe also the form of the parchment. Although one of its corners had been by some accident destroyed, it could be seen that the original form was oblong. It was just such a slip, indeed, as might have been chosen for a memorandum, for a record of something to be long remembered and carefully preserved. But, I interposed, you say that the skull was not upon the parchment when you made the drawing of the beetle. How then do you trace any connection between the boat and the skull, since this latter, according to your own admission, must have been designed, God only knows how or by whom, at some period subsequent to your sketching of the Scarabaeus? Ah, hereupon turns the whole mystery, and I will not do the voice after that point, just to emphasize the change in narrators. Although the secret at this point I had comparatively little difficulty in solving, my steps were sure and could afford but a single result. I reasoned, for example, thus. When I drew the Scarabaeus, there was no skull apparent on the parchment. When I had completed the drawing, I gave it to you and observed you narrowly until you returned it. You therefore did not design the skull, and no one else was present to do it. Then it was not done by human agency, and nevertheless it was done. At this stage, my
aliens.
At this stage of my reflections, I endeavored to remember, and did remember, with entire distinctness, every incident which occurred about the period in question. The weather was chilly. Oh, rare. Oh, rare and happy accident. And fire was blazing on the hearth. I was heated with exercise and sat near the table. You, however, had drawn a chair close to the chimney. Just as I placed the parchment on your hand, and as you were in the act of inspecting it, Wolf, the Newfoundland, entered and leaped upon your shoulders. With your left hand, you caressed him and kept him off, while your right...
Get off of me, you little bastard!
While your right, holding the parchment, was permitted to fall listlessly between your knees, and in close proximity to the fire. At one moment I thought the blaze had caught it, and was about to caution you, but before I could speak, you had withdrawn it and were engaged in examination. When I considered all these particulars, I doubted not for a moment that TheHande had been the agent in bringing to light on the parchment the skull which I saw designed on it. You are well aware that chemical preparations exist and have existed time out of mind by means which it is possible to write on either paper or vellum so that the characters shall become visible only when subjected to the action of fire.
Invisible ink, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, saffrey digested in aqua regia and diluted with 4 times its weight of water is sometimes employed. The green tint results. The regulus of cobalt, dissolved in spirit of nitra, gives a red. These colors disappeared at longer for shorter intervals after the material written on cools, but again become apparent upon reapplication of heat. I now scrutinize the death's head with care. Its outer edges, the edges of the drawing nearest the edge of the vellum, were far more distinct than the others. I was clear that the action of the caloric had been imperfect and unequal. I immediately kindled a fire and subjected every portion of the parchment to a glowing heat. At first, only effect was strengthening of the faint lines of the skull, but on persevering in the experiment, there became visible at the corner of the slip, diagonally opposite to the spot in which the death's head had delineated, a figure of what I at first supposed to be a goat. A closer scrutiny, however, satisfied me that it was intended for a kid. Ha ha, said I. To be sure that I have no right to laugh at you. $1.5 million money is too serious a matter for mirth. But you are not about to establish a third link in your chain. You will not find any special connection between your pirates and goat. Pirates, you know, have nothing to do with goats. They appertain to the farming interest. This is a really stupid conversation out of context.
Yeah.
But I have just said that the figure was not that of a goat. Well, a kid then. Perhaps much the same thing. Pretty much, but not altogether, said Legrand. You may have heard of one Captain Kidd. I at once looked on the figure of the animal as a kind of punning or hieroglyphical signature. I say signature because its position on the vellum suggested this idea. The death's head on the corner diagonally opposite had in the same manner the air of a stamp or seal. I knew that was coming, but I was sorely put out by the absence of all else, of the body to my imagined instrument, or the text for my context. I presume you expected to find a letter between the stamps and the signature? Something of that kind. And I will not do the voice after that. That kind, the fact is, I felt irresistibly impressed with a presentiment of some vast good fortune impeding. I can scarcely say why. Perhaps, after all, it was rather a desire than an actual belief. But do you know that Jupiter's silly words about the buck being of solid gold had remarkable effect on my fancy? And then the series of accidents and coincidences. These were so very extraordinary. Do you observe how mere an accident it was that these events should have occurred on the sole day of all the year in which it has been, or may be, sufficiently cool for fire, and that without the fire, or without the intervention of the dog at the precise moment in which he appeared, I should never have become aware of the death's head, and so never the possessor of the treasure. But proceed, I am all impatience. Well, you have heard, of course, the many stories current The 1,000 vague rumors afloat about money buried somewhere on the Atlantic coast by Kidd and his associates. These rumors must have had some foundation in fact, and that the rumors have existed so long and so continuously could have resulted, it appeared to me, only from the circumstance of the buried treasure still remaining entombed. Had Kidd concealed his plunder for a time and afterwards reclaimed it, the rumors would scarcely have reached us in their present unvarying form. You will observe that the stories told are all about money seekers, but not about money finders. Had the pirate recovered his money, there the affair would have dropped. It seemed to me that some accident, say the loss of a memorandum indicating its locality, had deprived him of the means of recovering it, and that this accident had become known to I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be his followers, and not his followers, who otherwise might never have heard the treasure had been concealed at all, and who, busying themselves in vain, because unguided attempts to regain it had given first birth and then universal currency to the reports which are now so common. Have you ever heard of any important treasure being unearthed along the coast? Never. But that Kidd's accumulations were immense is well known. I took it for granted, therefore, that the earth still held them, and you will scarcely be surprised when I tell you that I felt a hope nearly amounting to certainty that the parchment so strangely found involved the lost record of the place of deposit. But how did you proceed? I held the vellum again to the fire after increasing the heat, but nothing appeared. I now thought it possible that the coating of dirt might have something to do with the failure, so I carefully rinsed the parchment by pouring warm water on it, and having done this, I placed it in a tin pan with the skull downward, and put the pan upon a furnace of lighted charcoal. In a few minutes, the pan having become thoroughly heated, I removed the slip, and to my inexplicable joy, found it spotted in several places with what appeared to be figures arranged in lines. Again, I placed it in the pan and suffered it to remain to another minute. On taking it off, the whole was just as you see it now. Here Legrand, having reheated the parchment, submitted it to my inspection. The following characters were rudely traced in a red tint between the death's head and the goat. And here we also, in the story, it shows a group of symbols in 8 lines that I cannot pronounce.
And if you're reading this alongside us, no, the Zodiac Killer didn't write this.
But, said I, returning to him the slip, I am as much in the dark as ever. Were all the jewels of Golconda? I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that. Awaiting me on my solution of this enigma, I am quite sure that I should be unable to earn them. And yet, said Legrand, the solution is by no means so difficult as you might be led to imagine from the first hasty inspection of the characters. These characters, as any one might readily guess, form a cipher. That is to say, they convey a meaning, but they, from what is known of Kidd, I could not suppose him capable of constructing any of the more abstruse cryptographs. I made up my mind at once that this was of a simple species, such, however, as would appear to the crude intellect of the sailor, absolutely insoluble without the key and some spinach. And you really solved it? Readily. I have solved others of an abstruseness 10,000 times greater. Circumstances and a certain bias of mind have led me to take interest in such riddles, and it may well be doubted whether human ingenuity can construct an enigma of the kind which human ingenuity may not, by proper application, resolve. In fact, having once established connected and legible characters, I scarcely gave a thought to the mere difficulty of developing their import. In the present case, indeed, in all cases of secret writing, the first question regards the language of the cipher. For the principles of solution, so far especially as the more simple ciphers are concerned, depend on or varied by the genius of the particular idiom. In general, there is no alternative but experiment, directed by probabilities of every tongue known to him, who attempts the solution until the true one be attained. But the cipher now before us, all difficulty is removed by the signature. The pun of the word kid is appreciable in no other language than the English. But for this consideration, I should have begun my attempts with Spanish and French, as the tongues in which secret of this kind would most naturally have been written by a pirate of the Spanish Main. As it was, I assumed the cryptograph to be English. You observe there are no divisions between the words. Had there been divisions, the task would have been comparatively easy. In such case, I should have commenced with the collation and analysis of the shorter words, and had a word of a single letter occurred, as is most surely A or I, for example, I should have, or maybe L, I'm not sure, maybe I should have considered the solution as assured. But there being no division, my first step was to ascertain the predominant letters, as well as the least frequent. Counting all, I constructed the table thus. And it shows the symbols then listed in accordance to frequency. Now in English, the letter which most frequently occurs is E. Afterwards, the succession runs thus: A, O, I, D, H, N, R, S, T, U, Y, C, F, C, L, M, W, B, K, P, Q, X, Z.
What does it spell? Go team!
What does it spell? E sometimes predominates so remarkably that the individual sentence of any length is rarely seen in which it is not the prevailing character. Here, then, we have, in the very beginning, the groundworks of something more than mere guess. The general use which may be made on the table is obvious, but in this particular cipher, we shall only very partially require its aid. As our predominant character is 8, we will commence by assuming as the E of the natural alphabet. To verify the supposition, let us observe if the 8 be seen often in couples, for E is doubled with a great frequency in English, in such words, for example, as meet, fleet, speed, seen, been, agree, and etc. Wait
a second.
In the present instance, we see it doubled less than 5 times, although the cryptograph is brief. Let us assume 8, then, is as E. Now, of all words in the language, the is the most usual. Let us see, therefore, whether they are not repetitions of any 3 letters in the same order of collocation, or the last of them being 8. If we discover repetitions of such letters so arranged, they will most probably present the word the. On inspection, we find no less than 7 arrangements, and the characters being, 48, semicolon 48. We may, therefore, assume that the semicolon represents T, and 4 represents H, and that 8 represents E. The last being now well confirmed. Thus the great step has been taken. But having established a single word, we are enabled to establish a vastly important point, that is to say, several commencements of terminations of other words. Let us refer, for example, to the last instance but one in which the combination semicolon 48 occurs. Not far from the end of the cipher, we now know that the semicolon immediately ensuing is the commencement of the word, and of the 6 characters succeeding this the. We are cognizant that no less than 5, let us set these characters down. Thus, by the letters we know them to represent, leaving the space for the unknown. T E E T H. Here we are enabled at once to discard the th as forming no portion of the word commencing with the first t, since by experiment of the entire alphabet or a letter adapted to the vacancy, we perceive that no word can be formed which this th can be a part. We are thus narrowed to T-E-E, and though and going through the alphabet, if necessary, as before, we arrive at the word tree as the sole possible reading. We thus gain another letter, R, represented by the left parentheses, and with the word the tree in juxtaposition. Looking beyond these words for the short distance, we again see the combination semicolon 48 and employ it by way of termination to what immediately precedes, and we thus we have thus this arrangement: the tree semicolon 4 left parentheses double cross question mark 3 4 the comma, or substituting the natural letters where known, it reads the tree thr double cross question mark 3 h th the now period. Wait. Did it change? Is that a mistake? Ow. Now, if in place of the unknown characters we leave blank spaces or substitute the dots, we read, okay, and I'm not going to read all of these. When the word through makes itself evident at once, but this discovery gives us 3 new letters, O, U, and A and G, represented by the double cross question mark and 3. Looking now narrowly through the cipher of the combination of words, combination of known characters, we find not very far from the beginning this arrangement 8-3 left parentheses 8-8 or agree, which plainly is the conclusion of the word degree and gives us another letter D, represented by the long cross. 4 letters beyond the word degree, we perceive the combination semicolon 4-6 left parentheses semicolon 8-8 asterisks, translating the known characters and representing the unknown by dots. As before, we read the tree, and the arrangement immediately suggestive of the word 13, and again furnishing us with the 2 characters I and N, represented by 6 and asterisk. Referring now to the beginning of the cryptograph, we find the combination 5-3 double cross long cross, translating as before to obtain dot good comma.
I could always use some dot good comma in my life, that's for sure.
Which assures that the first letter is A and that the first 2 words are a good. To avoid confusion, it is now time that we arrange our key as far as discovered in a tabular form. It will stand thus, and again it shows a bunch of the symbols. Mm-hmm. We have therefore no less than 10 of those important letters represented, and it will be unnecessary to proceed with the details of the solution. Good, because it's dragging this story out. I have said enough to convince you that ciphers of this nature are readily soluble and to give you some insight into the rationale of the development, but be assured that the specimen before us appertains to the very simplest species of cryptograph. It now only remains to give you the full translation of the characters upon the parchment, as unriddled. Here it is. Yar! A good glass in the bishop's hostel in the devil's seat, 41 degrees and 13 minutes northeast, and by north main branch 7th limb east side. Shoot from the left eye to the death's head, and beeline from the tree through the shot 50 feet out. Yar! But...
Yep, so directions.
Yes. But, said I, the enigma seems still in a bad condition as ever. How is it possible to extort a meaning from all this jargon about devil's seats? Devil's seats? And devil's heads and bishop's hostel. I confess, replied Legrand, that the matter still wears a serious aspect when regarded with a casual glance. My first endeavor was to divide the sentence into the natural divisions intended by the cryptographist. Sorry.
No, cryptographist, not crypt keeper, sorry.
Yeah. You mean to punctuate it? Something of that kind. But how was it possible to effect this? I reflected that it had been a point with the writer to run his words together without division, so as to increase the difficulty of solution. Now, not over acute man, is in pursuing such an object would be nearly certain to overdo the matter, when, in the course of this composition, he arrived at the break in his subject, which would naturally require a pause or a point. He would be exceedingly apt to run his characters at this place, more than usually close together. If you will notice the message in the present instance, you will easily detect 5 such cases of unusual crowding. Acting on this hint, I made the division thus: a good glass in the bishop's hostel in the devil's seat, 41 degrees 13 minutes northeast and by north, main branch 7th limb east side, shoot from the left eye to the of the death's head, and beeline from the tree through the shot 50 feet out. Even this division, said I, leaves me still in the dark. It seems pretty clear to me. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. It left me also in the dark, replied Legrand.
No, don't say stuff like that. It'll just go on and on and on again. They're just not in agree.
For a few days, during which I made diligent inquiry to the neighborhood of Sullivan's Island for any building which went by the name of Bishop's Hostel, for, of course, I dropped the obsolete word hostel. Gaining no information on the subject, I was on the point of extending my sphere of search and proceeding to a more systematic manner, when, one morning, it entered into my head, quite suddenly, that this Bishop's Hostel, which had some reference to an old family of the name Bessop, which, time out of mind, had held possession of an ancient manor house, about 4 miles to the northward of the island. I accordingly went over the plantation and reinstituted my inquiries among the older Negroes of the place. At length, one of the most aged of the women said that she had heard of such a place as Bessop's Castle, and thought that she could guide me to it, but that it was not a castle nor a tavern, but a high rock. I offered to pay her well for her trouble, and after some demur, she consented to accompany me to the spot. We found it without much difficulty. When, dismissing her, I proceeded to examine the place. The castle consisted of an irregular assemblage of cliffs and rocks, one of the latter being quite remarkable for its height, as well for its insulated and artificial appearance. I clambered to its apex, and then felt much at a loss as to what should be done. While I was busied in reflection, my eyes fell upon the narrow ledge of the eastern face of the rock, perhaps a yard below the summit, on which I stood. This ledge projected about 18 inches and was not more than a foot wide, while a niche in the cliff just above it gave it rude resemblance to one of the hollow-backed chairs used by our ancestors. I made no doubt that here was the devil's seat alluded to in the message, and now I seemed to grasp the full secret of the riddle. The good glass, I knew, could have referred to nothing but a telescope, for the word glass is rarely employed in any other sense by seamen.
Oh my!
Now here I at once saw a telescope to be used, and a definite point of view, admitting no variation from which to use it. Nor did I hesitate to believe that the phrases 41 degrees and 13 minutes and northeast by the north were intended as directions for the leveling of the glass. Greatly excited by these discoveries, I hurried home, procured a telescope, and returned to the rock. I let myself down to the ledge and found that it was impossible to retain a seat on it unless in one particular position. This fact confirmed my preconceived ideas. I proceeded to use the glass. Of course, the 41 degrees and 13 minutes could allude to nothing but the elevation above the visible horizon, since the horizontal direction was clearly indicated by the words northeast and by north. This latter direction I at once established by means of pocket compass, when pointing the glass as nearly at an angle of 41 of elevation as I could do it by guess. I moved it cautiously up and down until my attention was arrested by a singular rift or opening in the foliage of the large tree that overtopped its fellows in the distance. In the center of this rift, I perceived a white spot, but could not at first distinguish what it was. Adjusting the focus of the telescope, I again looked, and now made it out to be a human skull.
Hello.
Yes. On this discovery, I was so sanguine as to consider the enigma solved, for the phrase, main branch, 7th limb, east side, could refer only to the position of the skull on the tree, while shoot from the left eye of the death's head admitted also of but one interpretation in regard to the search for buried treasure. I perceived that the design was to drop a bullet from the left eye of the skull, and that a beeline, or, in other words, a straight line, drawn from the nearest point of the trunk through the shot, or spot, where the bullet fell, and thence extended to the distance of 50 feet, would indicate a definite point, and beneath this point I thought it at least possible that a deposit of value concealed. All this, I said, is exceedingly clear, and although ingenious, still simple and explicit. When you left the Bishop's Hotel, what then? Oh, that was the narrator, sorry. Well, you can't tell at this point anyway. Why, having carefully taken the bearings of the tree, I turned homeward, and the instant that I left the Devil's Seat, however, the circular rift vanished, nor could I get a glimpse of it afterwards. Turn as I would, what seems to me the chief ingenuity of this whole business is the fact, for repeated experiments has convinced me of the fact, that the circular opening in the question is visible from no other attainable point of view than the afforded by the narrow ledge of the face of the rock. In this expedition to the Bishop's Hotel I had been attended by Jupiter, who had no doubt observed for some weeks past the abstraction of my demeanor, and took especial care not to leave me alone. But on the next day, getting up very early, I contrived to give him the slip, and went into the hills in search of the tree. After much toil I found it. When I came home at night, my valet proposed to give me a flogging, but with the rest of the adventure, I believe you are well acquainted as myself. I suppose, said I, you missed the spot in the first attempt at digging through Jupiter's stupidity in letting the bug fall through the right instead of the left of the skull. Precisely. This mistake made a difference of about 2.5 inches in the shot. That is to say, in the position of the peg nearest to the tree, and had the treasure been beneath the shot, the error would have been of little moment, but the shot, together with the nearest point of the tree, were merely 2 points of the establishment of a line of direction. Of course, the error, however trivial in the beginning, increased as we proceeded with the line, and by the time we had gone 50 feet, threw us quite off the scent. But for my deep-seated conviction that the treasure was here, and somewhere actually buried, we might have had all our labor in vain. I presume the fancy of the skull of letting fall a bullet through the skull's eye was suggested to Kidd by the piratical flag. No doubt he felt a kind of poetical consistency in recovering his money through the ominous insignium. Perhaps so. Still, I cannot help thinking that common sense had quite as much to do with the matter as poetical consistency. To be visible from the devil's seat, it was necessary that the object, if small, should be white. And there is nothing like your human skull for retaining and even increasing its whiteness under exposure of all vicissitudes of weather.
Hey, that's scientifically inaccurate. Most skulls are more like creamy colored than white.
Yeah, but meaning like that it gets bleached in the sun and by the weather. Yeah, but your grandiloquence and your conduct in swinging the beetle, how excessively odd! I saw sure that you were mad, and why did you insist on letting?
Sorry, I just got a vivid imagination of a pirate just grabbing the Beatles, the band, and just swinging them around.
Beatles the band.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
that is a quite a visage. Okay. Why did you insist on letting fall the bug instead of a bullet from the skull? Why, to be frank, I felt somewhat annoyed by your evident suspicions touching my sanity, and so resolved to punish you quietly, in my own way, by a little bit of sober mystification. For this reason I swung the beetle, and for this reason I let it fall from the tree. An observation of yours about its great weight suggested the latter idea.
So he did it out of spite.
Yes, I perceive, and now there is only one point which puzzles me. What are we to make of the skeletons found in the hole? That is a question I am no more able to answer than yourself. There seems, however, only one plausible way of accounting for them, and yet it is dreadful to believe in such atrocity as my suggestion would imply. It is clear that Kidd, if Kidd indeed secreted this treasure, which I doubt not, it is clear that he must have had assistance in the labor. But the worst of this labor concluded, he may have thought it expedient to remove all participants in his secret. Perhaps a couple of blows with a mattock was sufficient, while his coadjutors were busy in the pit. Perhaps it required a dozen. Who shall tell? The end. All right. So, that was the gold bug. So, like we always ask at the end of these podcasts, what did you think of that story, Kaiser?
That was a pretty fun one, although it does suffer a little bit from the Edgar Allan Poe tropes of where he just, I don't know, he likes to drone on at one part of his story as he normally does.
Yeah, and I think I said that at the beginning. It's been so long I forgot already. But yeah, the ending, I love this. I do love this story, but the ending is so long. It is like a Hercule Poirot tirade, but like 10 times worse. So, because I think Poe just had this obsession of always just showing how clever his protagonists are. And don't get me wrong, like I think the ending of the Murders of the Rue Morgue had a little bit of that problem, but I don't think it was this bad. And also, but okay, so I mentioned at the start that, you know, this was one of Poe's most successful stories, and there were those symbols that we couldn't read out loud, obviously, because, you know, it would have been, it wouldn't have been very interesting. But, so, Poe wrote this story at a time when hobbyist cryptography was a big fad in the US. So, that's the reason why the story got so popular, because people liked the fact that there was a cryptographic message in the story.
So he clickbaited everyone.
Yeah. So if you ever wondered, was Poe above writing trends? No, clearly not. But he didn't do that very often, though, obviously. So, yeah. So, in a weird way, again, I had to draw the comparisons to the Murders in the Rue Morgue. In a way, it is kind of fun when you see the cryptography, and if you kind of want to skim to the end of the story and want to, like, figure it out for yourself, you can. But, yeah, the mystery part of it really does work when they're looking for the treasure. And I had kind of forgotten, like, how exciting that part where they're going over the treasure. That was actually kind of fun, honestly. Like, this is probably the most heartwarming of all of Poe's stories. Like, it had a happy ending. They made out with the payday, and I like the characters, you know, a lot. So this is probably like, it is an outlier And I have a blog on my I have a blog that I wrote already a couple of years ago where I listed all my favorite Edgar Allan Poe stories, and this one was there, but it was number 10, and it's number 10 specifically because the ending kind of grinds it to a halt, unfortunately. That's my biggest gripe with this
Yeah.
story. But I love it. I love the swashbuckling ridiculousness of the adventure, and that's I kind of take I do take a little bit of issue with people referring to this as an adventure story. I don't think it has quite that much, but I would definitely say that
It's not quite Indiana Poe just yet.
Indiana Poe. Yeah, yeah. So, but it is. But I usually like it when you find like a really fun outlier in the canon of like a specific writer. It's always a lot of fun for me. Now, I think we do have to spare a few words for Jupiter and the racial depictions in this story. How do you feel about now that we have read the story? How do you feel about the whole thing?
Uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean the thing is like Poe does not definitely like paint a Poe doesn't definitely paint a very flattering picture of Jupiter during the Skull debacle. In the earlier parts of the story, however, the reason I really like Jupiter is because, like it says, like he seems like genuinely concerned for Legrand. But there
Then
is
he gets turned into a comedic sidekick.
he is treated a bit comedic, and that's the other thing that strikes me about the story, like how much comedy there actually is. Like Poe didn't really do comedy ever, like not even like very kind of dark comedy. Like Lovecraft would occasionally kind of indulge in, but like Jupiter is like shown to be like this genuinely very caring person at the start, but of course, and Poe makes a note at the very beginning. Jupiter is a free man. He's not a slave. It still bothers me a bit that he does call Legrand master. So that definitely it kind of shows like Poe having this kind of a and I suppose this was unfortunately very common at the time. This was before the Civil War, that he had a kind of a very submissive view of black people, that they lacked agency. Edward, like so in other words, like that. I personally would like to look at Jupiter as just somebody who genuinely is just like very concerned for Legrand, but it is possible that he can be viewed a little bit as that he just doesn't know what to do with himself, and that's why he decides to live with the guy. Which, to be fair, like he has a pretty miserable existence. He lives in a fucking hut in the middle of a swamp, waterland, water area basically. Yeah, and yeah, but right up until the skull thing, though, I do think Jupiter is still like depicted mostly in a very positive light and a fairly like a good one. But that left the fact that he doesn't know left from his left from his right. Like, yeah, in 1840, whatever this was, that might have been the height of comedy, but 200 years later, it does come off a little patronizing. So yeah.
Speaking of sense of humor, there's one part in the end I particularly liked, like the reason why Legrand used the gold bug to find the treasure. I liked how he just did it out of spite.
Yeah, I didn't actually really think about that whole aspect of it. It's been a while, and I think the last time I read this story, I stopped when he started going on about the cryptographs, because I honestly I don't care. They found the treasure. Yeah. We've seen all the good parts. Yeah.
But yeah, Legrand is a bit. He thinks highly of himself, that's for sure.
Well, that's the thing. Like, he comes from a ruined, like, upper class family. Like, he used to have, his family used to have money. He used to, he had clearly good schooling. But then something went wrong. Like, Poe is very like not clear on the details of what the hell happened. But something caused him to lose all of his family fortune, and that's why he's living in a shack in the middle of nowhere with one of his former servants who still insists on serving him. Yeah. But like I said, so the neighbor word, the one that I refuse to say. Now, like I said, it appeared 4 times in the story. You might have noticed. You might have noticed that the only person in the story who used it, was actually Jupiter himself, which
I've
is
noticed that.
which is interesting because, like I said, the Negro in the 1800s, that was actually considered like, the proper term for a black person. You know what was actually considered a more derogatory term that they had actually fallen out of use by that point.
I do not want to know.
It was
Go
colored,
on.
which surprises me.
Ah, okay.
But colored was actually considered more derogatory at that time. Like you would, if you called somebody a Negro back then, you just said it's black because literally it comes from Spanish. Negro,
Yeah, it translates to the word black.
yeah, Negro to this day still in Spanish. It just means the color black. So, but obviously it's fallen out of use, except in very, very, if you're talking about like a Negro spiritual music, for instance. Those contexts, it's considered still acceptable, but like as a general descriptor, yeah, absolutely nobody would call you that. The other N word, the one that I refuse to say, even back then, even in the 1800s, that was a derogatory slur term. You only said it when you were making a point that a person of another color was beneath you. So that has always been a bad word, even in post time, which makes it strange to me that Jupiter is the one who uses it. Because, of course, nowadays, black people will use that word as an empowerment word. But I don't think it was used that way in Jupiter's time. So the implication there is that Jupiter has been called that word before, and then for some reason he has just adopted it as a
I've
way of.
noticed that with his character. He seems to still have the mindset of being a slave, like conditioning. He's just so used to it that he just lives that way still.
Yes, and that's the part, and that,
because they also mention that he's old as well, so
yeah, and that is
it's
a
probably
that,
been beaten into his mind so much that he can't get rid of it, unfortunately.
yeah, which is interesting. Which I say that's kind of my biggest problem with Jupiter as a character, because he is shown to have like a pretty distinct personality, though. He's a great personality, and like I said, he's like first instinct when Legrand gives him the slip, he's mad at him, he wants to beat him up, but then when he sees like how badly he's doing, like he doesn't have the heart to do it. So he's quite the character, and it kind of annoys me that discussions of the gold bug as a story, I get the feeling there is a certain segment of the Poe fan community who and Poe historians. Some Poe historians do give this story, credit for the sheer success that it had. Some are dismissive of it because it's not gothic horror, the thing that Poe was known for, or and if you wanted to count it as a mystery fiction, it's a very light mystery. But then some people will just out and out dismiss it completely because of this one character in the story, and I hate that. I hate that. Yes, it's not, it hasn't aged well. It has aged very, very badly.
Oh yeah, really poorly.
But I still think Jupiter's a fun character, even despite all of that. So, yeah. Anyway, any other thoughts about the story? Did you enjoy the little piratey aspect of it? Because
I kind of had a feeling it was going to be pirate treasure when they saw the skull on there.
I don't remember, when was Treasure Island written? I forget now. But that's the one that kind of introduced a lot of these pirate tropes.
Yeah, like I gotta love how the most famous pirate tropes is that they're elaborate geniuses that like to really encrypt their treasures.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. It came out much later, 1883. So Poe beat him to the punch. So I suppose then Treasure Island was combining pirate tropes that were already in the public consciousness. But I get the feeling like that definitely does, because Poe didn't write too many stories about pirates either. So that sounds to me a little bit like he was writing on trends a bit. But and Captain Kidd was a real pirate.
Well, he needed to eat. He needed the money.
Yeah, but it is kind of fun. I do think it's a fun swashbuckling
It is.
addition. It's kind of the way we had those random pirates in the Call of Cthulhu story as well. like
It's honestly it's a little refreshing here. Poe's story that doesn't have like a sad ending. It doesn't have like these dark surprise twists to it.
yeah. Well, they do. Well, there is that little dark part at the very end when they're contemplating like what. So who were those skeletons? That they found with the treasure, and they're insinuating they're like, oh well, Kid probably killed them, just so that they wouldn't know or they wouldn't tell anybody where the treasure was.
They wouldn't squeal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, which again feels a little bit tropey, but again, maybe because this was so long before the big pirate stories would come along. Like, again, Poe was a bit of an innovator there, I suppose, possibly. I don't know not much about pirate fiction, so I have to really look that up. So, anything else you want to add?
No.
Okay, then I think that is finally the end of this podcast. Thank you for listening if you listened to the very end. And I hope you had a good time with these two doofuses reading the story.
And send all your complaints to Hanu over here. Don't send any to me. No.
All right. But thank you for listening. I've been Hanu TheHande Mäkinen. See you on the next one. Bye-bye. Yar.
Later, guys.
And it's going now.
Oh fuck! I missed.
Okay, I'm saving that for the blooper reel. Okay. Let's do it again. It's still going. There's some. I jumped the gun. Can you do it again?